Hi, welcome to the Reclamation Project podcast. This is our very first podcast, and just wanted to put a little note here before it started. We actually listened to this podcast, and we were thinking about redoing it. The sound quality wasn't all that great. We had some issues that went on, and you may be able to hear them, you may not, as you listen to this podcast. But for that reason, we were thinking about rehashing this and trying to duplicate it. But as I listened back and really looked at this podcast, we really felt like there was some good content, and we didn't want to lose any of it. We didn't want to try to duplicate it and leave something out. So the podcast you're about to hear, sound quality is not that great, but we really feel like it's a tool that can be used. It's a tool that people can have in their pocket and really hopefully use to help them in their pursuit of happiness. So without further ado, here's the first podcast. Thanks for listening. Hi, welcome to the Reclamation Project podcast. This is our first real podcast. The last one was an intro. We're happy you guys are here. We're excited about it. Looking forward to it. And today we're just really going to dive into the thought of being happy. Really, when it comes down to it, there's a lot of unhappiness in this world. There's a lot of people who are stuck in ruts and stuck in just seasonal times where they are just unhappy. And we're not talking about just being unhappy for a moment or just being unhappy for today, but people who are just really, really stuck in unhappiness, a seasonal unhappiness, a lifestyle of unhappiness. That's what we're really looking at and what it really means to be happy.
And I think it's not just what are all the things I can do to be happy, but when real life hits, how can I navigate those things and still find happiness?
Yeah, I mean, to a lot of us, I think happiness is about how we feel. It's about an emotion. And really, when it comes down to it, happiness isn't about this fleeting feeling, this temporal feeling. It's not about the circumstances that have brought you there. It's about how you've really approach those circumstances.
And what you're going to find out is being happy actually takes work. We'll talk about it in a few minutes, that happiness is a choice. And the mind wasn't created just to be happy. We weren't, we think if we're not happy, there's something wrong with us. But really, the very center part of your mind is survival, which is kind of negative. You walk into a room and you look around, what could go wrong? Where am I in danger? All those sound like negative terms. So happiness really takes work. It just doesn't happen. It's not arbitrary or random, which means if it takes work, that I do have some responsibility and some ownership in if I'm happy or not. And that's the choice part.
Yeah, I mean, it really... you really have to figure out the way that you're going to attack each circumstance, that you're going to look at each circumstance. A great term that I've kind of learned in the last few months is just reframing, how you reframe that circumstance and that place that you are. Gary, could you talk to us a little bit about how reframing works, how we can use that?
Yeah, there's a term they use in psychology called cognitive reframing, which is really boils down to if you change the definition of something, you also change the feeling of that meaning. Really, all these brilliant psychologists got together and they called it two things. They called it Robinson Crusoe theory or the butt theory. And I'm thinking, really, all you brains could only come up with butt theory. The idea is this. The Robinson Crusoe theory is, the story, he sinks in a ship and he makes it to a desert island. And then he says, my ship is sunk and I'm all alone, but you made it here alive. I have no clothes to wear, but you're on a tropical island, you really just don't need clothes. So the main point is to every negative idea, there's a corresponding positive thought. I hold the throttle to whether I want it to go negative or positive. Let me give you an example. So I'm coaching this guy who worked for Intel, made a lot of money at Intel, and he was laid off. And he really became so depressed. He, like everyone else, had constructed his life to go week to week, paycheck to paycheck, even though he made really good money. So the thought of not having a current paycheck really bothered him. In that process, I kept trying to have him reframe the possibilities of this. He just couldn't get it. He started to get angry. He stopped meeting our appointments. About 4 months into that, he gets a job at Dial Corporation up in Scottsdale, starting him about $55,000 more than he made. So now he's over $200,000 a year. So we're having coffee, and I said, now I want you to reframe being laid off from Intel. He said, that was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. Of course, it's hard to reframe in the moment, but if you can, the sooner you can reframe, the more peace you have, the more you've increased the likelihood to experience happiness. So, well, Jeremy, think of a dark time or a hard time for you, and we'll see if we can't maybe practice reframing in that.
Well, for me, it's happened recently. I mean, I'm an introvert. I'm very much thought provoked. I like to sit, and I'm happy just sitting in a room full of people and thinking, and sitting there and just thinking through topics, thinking through life, everything. I'm not a person who necessarily goes up to people and starts talking to them out of the blue. For the last, I'd probably say 6 months to a year, my wife says I've been in a depression. I wouldn't characterize it as depression. I know what depression is. I've been depressed as a kid, and it wasn't a depression. It was a rut. And what I found recently is, as I've come out of that, it was more of a negativity. It was viewing everything from a negative aspect, viewing everything from, I don't want to be here, and I hate this particular situation or circumstance. And it was more of that than an actual depression.
So you made a conscious choice to just feed the negative thoughts as opposed to the positive thoughts, correct?
Yeah, and I can sit there, and I've done this well over my life. I can sit there and I can fester and focus on and immerse myself in the negativity.
There's an old illustration that I've heard many times where this guy would take a walk through the small town, and every day he'd down the corner and he'd see this white dog and this black dog in the yard just fighting every day. He knew that was a staple of his walk. One day he sees the man sitting in the yard watching the two dogs fight. And he said to the owner, do these dogs do this every day? And he said, yeah. And he goes, well, which one wins, the white dog or the black dog? He goes, well, whatever one I feed the most. So the responsibility and the negative or positive thoughts are your choice when you get up in the morning, and you chose to think of the negative. Now, everything comes with a payoff. What was the payoff for you thinking the negative thoughts?
I think for me it was probably being glass half empty is a lot easier being glass half full. In that you're just never let down. You're bracing for the worst. You're already in the worst, so you don't have to take a hit as much.
I mean, that feeds off that old romantic saying that it's better to have loved and lost and then never have loved at all. That's a reframing technique. So the payoff might have been, would you say, protecting your emotions that way?
Oh, definitely. I mean, when you protect yourself, it doesn't hurt as much. I've gone through so many things in life where I've been let down or I've been hurt, to me, when you stay in that negative standpoint, it's easier not to get hurt.
And in the process of protecting yourself, what you do is just consistently hurt yourself every day. For the idea of maybe not getting hurt out there, I'm just going to go ahead and take the negative response because at least I'm ready for it.
Yeah, but in some aspects, I mean, it's I'm numb to that pain. So this is just life now.
Yeah.
Instead of I'm negative, this is just who I am. This is just what life is, and it's not going to change from this point.
So if you do that time after time, repetition helps you build a story in your head. So your story is, I am the negative guy.
Yeah, I mean, I've said it at work many times. I'm going to be the person who's always looking for the thing that could go wrong, and I'm going to prepare for that.
Yep.
And that's why I am valued, is because I'm looking out for what could happen in a negative connotation rather than something that could happen in a positive.
Right, and everything has a positive and negative to it, so that would be the positive, minute positive thing in a very negative outlook.
Yep.
Which is like, you could say, people always screw me over. So you might have 50 people in a row treat you really nice, and the 51st one screws you over. You say, see, I told you, people screwed me over.
Definitely.
A lot of times what develops that, I mean, happiness is a belief system too. So you have to go back to what forms our belief systems. Well, one of them is just how we grew up, our environment. Was your family, people you hung around with, negative mostly, positive? What was the environment you grew up in?
Environment I grew up in was, from what I can remember about it, is pretty happy. I mean, it's hard to remember emotions that you grew up around. But I'd have to say that probably the place where things started getting negative was just in teenage years. Your hormones change, your view of the world changes, and then that is a foundation for adulthood, foundation for who you become.
Yep. And it's in more than that, it's really a false foundation. It's just the story we tell. Have you ever met anybody that was depressed and they took antidepressant meds, yet they're still depressed?
Oh yeah.
The problem is they're taking the medication and yet they're telling themselves the same story, and that's how powerful the story is. In fact, it is really so powerful that the Bible says, as a man thinks in his heart, so he is. It doesn't say how God thinks of Jeremy is. It says how Jeremy thinks of Jeremy, he is. And as Gary thinks about Gary, he is. That's how powerful that story is. So when I do coaching, just a shameless plug for Numa Coaching Advantage, of which I've started. What we try to do is go in and figure out your story, and I just come alongside, try to help you co-author your story. So as you look back at were there any experiences, which is the second part of belief, can you pinpoint any experiences that kind of led you to a negative viewpoint to protect yourself?
Yeah, I'd have to say for me, and my parents are probably going to listen to this, so I don't want them to feel like it was a hugely negative thing, but I moved in my teenage years, right around 16, from something I knew, from something that was comfortable, to a place that I didn't know. And I always kind of felt like, that was a place where it was hard to get to know people. It was hard to get involved with people because it was a recent wound that, when you get to know people, when you get involved in people, when you immerse yourself in relationship, they rip away, for not of your own accord, something you did, but something that just happens. And so that was kind of my experience.
So you see how your story started to form. It would make sense to come out somewhere new and say, I just am not going to get close to anybody in Arizona, because wonder if my dad moves to Washington. And so you begin to protect yourself. And that protection makes sense. The problem is it works for a while. And then with that mindset, what was the likelihood of being truly happy in Arizona?
At that time, very slim.
Yep.
I mean, I had an exit plan. I was 16 and I had an exit plan for when I was 18, and it never came to fruition. Yep. But I was leaving. I was moving back to Texas, and I was going to restart up that chapter of my life.
Yep. So you put any new chapter in your life on hold based on a fantasy or maybe a reality. So if you were to reframe that as you're driving across probably the ugliest drive in the planet from Texas to Arizona, down the 40, there's plenty of time to think. If you would have done some reframing techniques then, what would Arizona have been like if you said, I'm going to Arizona, it's a new opportunity. I just might find the best friend I've ever had in Arizona. How would your outlook be better as you rolled into the state?
instead of listening to Bone Thugs and Harmony on the way over, okay.
Well, that'll always depress you anyway.
It'll always depress me too.
And Barry Manilow. Those two will send you right into depression.
But yeah, I'd say if you were to change that aspect, that direction that you're looking at the situation from, it would have been totally different, you know, and that's huge.
It would have changed the lens you looked at your future in.
Yeah.
And so it really does go back, as everything does, to a choice. You know, James 1, Bible tells us that he's talking to a group of people that were going through persecution, and he says, if you're going through hard times, choose joy. Like, that just really does, it sounds like bad counseling, doesn't it? Just choose joy. And the reason we don't is because we're trying to protect ourselves. Why would I open myself up for more pain? How have you navigated that? You found little tricks to navigate it. So in this move, you did find moments of happiness.
Yeah, I mean, I found purpose again. I mean, I found purpose in where we met, which was a ministry in Mesa. You know, found purpose in leading worship, playing guitar. Found purpose in work. Found purpose in marriage. I mean, you find little purposes here and there of what you're really doing in life, and it's less about what you were and now more about what you are.
And how did that change your fantasy of going back and reclaiming Texas? I mean, what did your newfound purposes, what did that do to your old story?
Well, it made me look through a lens of reality, which is something that has actually happened quite, I wouldn't say recently, but in the last few years is I started looking at it and saying, wow, if I would have went back, this would have happened. And if I would have, you know, moved, this wouldn't have happened. But it's made me look at the reality of a lot of my friends had moved on from there. You know, I guess the idea of romanticizing Texas and what it was expecting that would be what I'd be coming back to, and it's truly not what I'd be coming back to. What I'd be coming back to are completely changed different people, completely changed different situations. Dallas has grown so stinking huge since I've been there.
Yeah.
I have friends that have moved from here to there, and just seeing the difference is crazy. So the place that I had etched out in my heart and my memory and said that's where I was going back, that doesn't exist anymore. And so I have to reframe and move forward and be in the present, you know.
So using the Jeremy Butt theory, my parents pulled me away from Texas, but this is where I found purpose. I left all my friends, but here's where I found my wife. So reframing is great down the road. It makes sense of things past, but if we can learn reframing techniques at the very beginning, we save ourselves a lot of torture. I remember I used to hate when I used to hear a pastor say, to be thankful in all things. I'm like, well, that's easy for you to say. In fact, I've gone through some hard times when I'm like, God, I'm going to be thankful. I'm really not thankful. I'm only doing this because you told me to. I don't really want to do this, so I'm going to say the words because this is what you told me to do. Until I learned that if I can reframe this, instead of being negative, I say, I wonder what lies ahead. I wonder what new possibilities there are. And sometimes it's like, God, I wonder how you're going to sprinkle any voodoo magic on this one. This looks dire. But Scripture tells us, he says, choose joy. That's always it's a hard choice sometimes.
Yeah. Well, and that's where I came from with, going back to the story about my wife thinking I was depressed, is I sat and just said, you know what, it is negativity because I'm looking at everything half glass empty. So I chose to start looking at things from a different perspective through different lenses. And I chose to say, you know what, I'm going to make the best of this opportunity. I'm going to make the best of this situation. I'm going to go into this situation with a happiness and with a joy and with a desire to make the best of it rather than hating every aspect of it and saying, I don't even want to go.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had an event recently where hard day at work, work sucked, absolutely sucked. Had people emailing me asking me to do things that were very time consuming and very little short periods of time, just really constraining my resources. And then my wife says, okay, hey, we're going to go to this tonight. And I just sat down and said, I absolutely do not want to go tonight. I do not want to do this. This has been the crappiest day ever. I don't want to be around people. And
So you didn't know the old saying that a happy wife is a happy life?
right.
Okay.
Yes, I do know that. But so I just decided, you know what? Instead of coming at it in that direction, I'm just going to change. I'm going to go. I'm going to have fun. And on my drive over, I'm making this decision. And I get there, and people are like, what is wrong with Jeremy? He's in the best mood ever.
Red flag.
Red flag. No, but it was actually one of the best times I've had in a while. And that's just how when you reframe, it changes your whole focus. It's like you got a ship going one direction and you've just turned it around, and now it's smooth sailing instead of going against the current.
Absolutely.
You're flowing with the current. It feels good.
I remember when a friend called me and told me he bought himself a new, was it RAV4 or RAV4? What do they call the Toyota?
RAV4?
Yeah, RAV4. He said he bought a coffee color RAV4. I said, I have never seen a coffee color RAV4. Well, you can imagine what happened the next few days. I'm driving around the street. Oh, there's a coffee color one. There's a coffee color one. It was brought to my attention, and so that's kind of how life is. If I get up in the morning and I set my sights on positive, I've increased the likelihood I'm going to see the positive. Guess what? There's negative happening too, but I'm making a conscious choice to filter those out. Mm-hmm. That's what I think he's talking about in Scripture when he says, choose joy. I have these affirmations. I don't do them every morning, but once in a while I'll get up and I usually give them to everybody, tell them to do it every morning, but I just don't take my own medicine sometimes. But I really sit up in the morning and I kind of gear my brain when I say this. When I believe in myself, others will also. Because I suffer a little bit of self-doubt at times. As I give out love and respect, I increase the likelihood to be receiving both of them. This was a big one for me. The past has no power in my life today. When I say that out loud and I believe it, all those things that have followed me from my past that are usually negative, I strip it of its power. And it's okay to make mistakes. They're just simply opportunities to learn and grow. I live in fear of making mistakes to where I don't try, because if you don't try, you don't make a mistake. So I suffer from that. So I get up every morning and I say, if I make a mistake, it's okay. This is going to be a learning tool. My heart will be full of gratitude. You talk about setting the happiness standard for the morning. If I'm just driving, I'm going to be grateful for everything. I usually tell this in husbands and wives when we're doing marital counseling. She said, one of the ladies would say, I just can't be grateful for the stuff he does. And I said, I don't care how low you have to look. Just say, sweetheart, you buttoned your shirt all the way up today. I'm so thankful for that. I don't care how low you have to go. You can find something to be grateful for. I will find the positive in everything. If that is my standard I set in the morning, I'm looking for positive. I'm not looking for negative. And then the last one is I will always have compassion for others. What makes me happy, and I think you do too. That's why we have kind of ministry mindsets. Like, I love to help people. Mm-hmm. And really, that's the basis of this podcast. Maybe it's through some of our ramblings and babblings, someone will find some help in that. So when I gear myself every morning to say, I'm just going to have compassion on others, guess who I'm not thinking about all day? Me. And so that's kind of how you reframe prior. Reframing after is good. It can make past sense, but reframing, getting ready to reframe, changes your whole day.
And reframing is a great tool to have in your pursuit of happiness. In the coming weeks, we're going to be talking about happiness, more about fulfillment, purpose, being happy in the midst of pain. So please join us as we have discussions on that. And always feel free to give us feedback and join in the discussion. You can do that in a couple different places. One is on our website, which is rppodcast.com. The next is Twitter, where you can follow us at the RP Podcast. And then on Facebook at facebook.com/RP Podcast. Until next time, have a good one.